All right, so what if I told you there's a text from way back in the 19th century that might just hold a prophecy for our own time? And no, I'm not talking about some supernatural prediction. This is more like a clinical diagnosis, a deep dive into social collapse that it saw as the totally inevitable outcome of a society basically at war with itself. That's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
So, the text kicks things off with this incredibly dramatic, almost apocalyptic description. A day of wrath, a day of wasting and desolation. But here's the thing, it's not really talking about God's anger, not in the way you might think. It's actually describing this huge societal upheaval it calls the Day of Jehovah. Basically, a time of intense, worldwide trouble and confusion.
So what if this ancient-sounding prophecy isn't really about the end of the world, but the end of a world order? You see, the text itself frames this whole day of trouble not as some random punishment from above, but more like a doctor's diagnosis of a sick society. It's arguing that this collapse is just the natural, totally unavoidable result of its own actions. Kind of like a high fever that finally has to break.
Okay, so let's get into the symptoms of this world in conflict. The source is pretty clear. This coming trouble isn't about God being angry or malicious. Nope. It says this is the direct result of humanity, as a whole, basically rejecting what it calls counsels of peace and love, and, well, choosing a completely different path instead.
So, what's the root cause of this whole societal sickness? Well, according to the text, it all boils down to something it calls the carnal mind. Now that's just its term for a deep-seated human tendency towards selfishness, greed, and, looking out for number one above everything else. It's the polar opposite of the whole love your neighbor idea.
And this is where it gets really pointed. The text claims society has pretty much thrown the idea of mutual care out the window. In its place, a really ruthless new philosophy. Get all you can, no matter who loses by your gain. It pinpoints this exact mindset as the engine, the core driver, pushing the world straight towards a massive breakdown.
And this brings us right to the heart of the conflict, the real root of it all. Remember, this was written at the height of the Industrial Revolution. The author looked around and saw this growing, bitter clash between two groups, the wealthy, the capital class, and the working masses, or labor. And in the author's view, this wasn't a problem that could be fixed. It was an opposition that just couldn't be reconciled.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how the text lays out the arguments from both sides, very impartially. You've got capital on one side saying, hey, we have a right to the profits from our intelligence and hard work. The law of supply and demand is just how things are. Then you have labor on the other side, looking at those exact same things, machines, monopolies, supply and demand, and seeing them as a force that's going to crush them. So they say, we have to organize just to survive. The text doesn't pick a side. It just presents them as two forces on a collision course.
But then the text throws out this really stark warning. It predicts that as these tensions get worse and worse, the working masses are going to be tempted by anarchy, the idea of just tearing the whole system down. But it cautions them, saying they don't really grasp the absolute chaos that would unleash. The author's point is pretty blunt. The worst government is vastly better than no government at all.
Okay, so this is absolutely crucial to understanding the whole argument. The text says that when you read biblical prophecies about fire, about earthquakes, about the heavens melting, you're not supposed to take it literally. It's arguing that all of that is symbolic language for something else entirely, a massive social revolution.
And here is the decoder key it provides, which is pretty brilliant. Earth doesn't mean the planet we're standing on, it means human society, the social order. Mountains aren't mountains, they're kingdoms and governments. The heavens are the ruling powers, both religious and political. And fire? That's the symbol for the complete and utter destruction of that entire old order. It basically turns all that apocalyptic language into this powerful metaphor for a total social and political upheaval.
And to back this up, the author points right to Scripture. They make this analogy. Just as the world that was, meaning the old social order, perished in the flood back in Noah's day, the current social order, the heavens and the earth which are now, is destined for a similar end. But this time, it's not water, it's a symbolic fire of revolution. So this symbolic fire, this melting of the old world, it doesn't just happen out of the blue. The text actually predicts a very specific chain of events, like dominoes falling, one after another, leading to a total breakdown of society. And it's this terrifying downward spiral. First, you get massive labor revolts, strikes, resistance, everything escalating. In response, capital gets scared and withdraws, hoarding their money. That, of course, triggers a massive financial panic, bankruptcies everywhere.
And what happens when businesses fail? Mass unemployment. You've got tens of thousands of desperate people with nothing to lose. And the final step? Widespread anarchy, where all law and order just gets swept away. You can see how one step leads directly and, according to the text, inevitably to the next. And the text paints this incredibly vivid, almost cinematic picture of what that end looks like. It says the wealthy will literally cast their silver in the streets. Why? Because in a world of total chaos and social collapse, their money becomes completely worthless. It can't buy them safety, it can't buy them power, it can't even buy them food. But here's the big twist. The story doesn't end in despair and anarchy. The text actually frames all this catastrophic trouble as a kind of necessary purifying fire. Yeah, it's a violent rebirth, a really painful process, but an absolutely essential one to clear the ground for something brand new.
So out of the ashes of that old order, a new one rises. The text calls it new heavens and a new earth. Now, new earth doesn't mean a new planet. It means a completely reorganized human society, one that's founded on justice and love, not selfishness and power. And the new heavens? Well, that's the new spiritual and governmental authority, what the text calls Christ's kingdom, that will oversee this new society.
Okay, so what's the advice for the saints, for the believers who are supposed to be living through all this chaos? Well, the text basically prescribes a path of radical non-participation. It says, stay cheerful, practice contentment when everyone else is freaking out. And, this is key, take no part in the struggle. Don't side with capital, don't side with labor. Instead, you're supposed to be a calm messenger of peace, always pointing people to the good time coming after the storm.
And this all leaves us with one final, really provocative question. The text claims this chaos arrives in due time. So is it suggesting that history itself has a kind of hidden timetable? That these huge upheavals aren't just random events, but maybe part of an inevitable, even predictable, march towards some final outcome? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Are we just living through another turn of a wheel that was set in motion a long, long time ago?